in a crowded New York diner. A billionaire in a designer suit laughs at a waitress trying to give him financial advice. "You think you can teach me about money?" he mocks. But what she says next, just 10 simple words, will silence the entire diner and change his life forever. Ethan Cole was one of those billionaires who had everything: private jets, skyscrapers, and a reputation for arrogance. One evening, he stopped at a small diner during a business trip. The place smelled of fresh coffee and rain, and a young waitress named Maya served him with a tired smile. She looked ordinary, her apron stained, her hands rough, but her eyes had a quiet confidence. As Ethan checked his phone, he sighed. "The market's down again. Lost a few million today." Maya, while pouring his coffee, said softly, "Maybe it's time you stop chasing money and start letting it work for you." Ethan chuckled. "Oh, really? A waitress giving a billionaire financial advice? That's new." Instead of getting offended, Maya leaned in and said, "Sir, I wasn't always a waitress. I was an analyst at one of your companies, until you shut our department down." Ethan froze. He remembered the closure. Hundreds lost their jobs overnight, and he had justified it as just business. Now, standing before him was one of those faces, still standing, still strong. She continued, "When you fired us, I started investing small, $50 a week. I studied, learned patience, and today I own 3 rental properties. I might not be rich like you, but I sleep well." Ethan stared at her, utterly still, as the clinking of dishes and murmurs of other customers faded into silence. For a man used to controlling boardrooms and bending markets to his will, this silence felt heavier than gold. His hand hovered over the coffee cup, but he didn't lift it. He just kept looking at her. This waitress, this stranger, who had just shattered his pride with nothing but honesty. Maya turned away, scribbling something on her notepad, her movements calm, almost graceful. Ethan finally found his voice. "You said you were an analyst. For which department?" She smiled faintly, not looking at him. "Investment research. Division 7. You shut it down 2 years ago." His throat went dry. He remembered that meeting. The decision had come from a spreadsheet. Unprofitable unit, he had called it. He never thought about the people behind those numbers. Ethan leaned back, guilt rising like a tide. "I didn't know it affected you like that." Maya looked up now, meeting his eyes for the first time. "Of course you didn't. People like me don't exist in your world. Mr. Cole, we're just names on a layoff list." The words cut deep. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't have a clever reply. He took a sip of coffee, bitter like regret. Outside, rain started to pour again, tapping against the diner window like an old clock reminding him of time wasted. Maya placed a plate of pancakes in front of another customer, then returned to his table. She folded her arms, not with arrogance, but quiet confidence. "You know, when you closed that department, I cried for a week," she said softly. "But then I decided crying wouldn't pay my bills, so I started learning." "Learning?" Ethan asked. "Yes," she said, nodding. "I read about compound interest, about risk management, about saving before spending." Her voice was calm, almost like a teacher's. "Every week I set aside $50. No matter how hard the month was, I saved." Ethan blinked, curious now. "And what did you do with it?" She smiled. eyes gleaming, invested slowly, carefully, real estate, small stocks. I made mistakes, but I learned. Now I own 3 rental properties, small ones, but mine. Ethan's jaw tightened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're telling me a waitress became an investor? Maya laughed lightly. Not an investor, sir. Just someone who stopped fearing money. Those words echoed. Stopped fearing money. It was something Ethan, despite billions, had never managed to do. He looked down at his watch, a limited edition worth more than her yearly income. And for the first time, it looked cheap. She continued, You always told your employees money never sleeps, but you never told them that people do, and they burn out chasing it. The diner door opened, wind rushing in, fluttering napkins across the counter. Ethan didn't move. He just whispered, Why didn't you ever write to me? Tell me this? Maya gave a soft smile. Would you have listened? Her words struck him harder than any business rival ever could. She placed the check gently on the table. Money's like fire, she said. It can cook your meal or burn your house down. It depends on how you use it. He froze. That line, so simple, so true. It felt like a lifetime of wisdom compressed into one sentence. The chatter in the diner grew again, but Ethan heard nothing, just those words. Echoing, circling, demanding he think, really think, about what he'd become. When he finally looked up, she was gone, walking away, helping another customer, laughing with a little boy by the window. A waitress again. But not just a waitress anymore. Ethan watched her for a long time, realization dawning like sunrise. He had spent years building empires, crushing competition, chasing numbers. But in a 5-minute conversation with a woman society overlooked, he had just learned what it truly meant to build value. He looked down at the check again, then pulled out a black pen and signed it. Below his signature, he wrote a small note. Thank you for reminding me what wealth really means. He folded it quietly, placed a $10,000 tip under the plate, and walked out into the rain, not as a billionaire, but as a man humbled, awakened, and human again. The cold New York rain fell hard that night as Ethan Cole stepped out of the diner, his expensive shoes splashing through shallow puddles that glittered under the street lights. For the first time in years, he didn't rush to his waiting car. He just stood there, staring at the blurred reflection of the diner's neon sign flickering in the water. Each drop that hit his face felt like a quiet question from the universe. What have you really earned? His phone buzzed endlessly with calls from partners and investors, but he ignored it. The words of that waitress, money's like fire, repeated in his head, burning through the walls of arrogance he'd built over decades. That night, for the first time, Ethan didn't fall asleep to the sound of market updates or financial news. He sat by his hotel window, watching the rain, realizing how far he'd drifted from being human. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room like a second chance. Ethan opened his laptop, but instead of checking stock prices, he opened a blank document. The title he typed was simple: The Maya Project. He didn't know what it would become yet, only that it had to be something good, something that gave instead of taking. Over the next few weeks, he canceled meetings, refused interviews, and disappeared from the spotlight. Rumors spread. The billionaire was ill, retiring, bankrupt. But the truth was far different. He was rebuilding not his fortune, but his purpose. He spent hours in small community centers speaking to people he'd once called the invisible workforce. He listened to their struggles, their fears, their hopes. For every face he saw, he remembered Maya's, calm, strong, and wise beyond her uniform. Months passed, and the world finally heard about his new foundation, a fund designed to teach financial literacy to low-income workers, single parents, and laid-off employees. He named it the Maya Fund, not out of charity, but out of respect. Because, he told reporters, a woman in a diner reminded me that wealth means nothing if it doesn't create freedom for others. The story spread fast. Headlines, news channels, social media, people couldn't believe it. The arrogant billionaire had changed, but those who met him now saw it in his eyes. The pride was gone, replaced by quiet humility. He didn't wear $1,000 suits anymore. He wore open shirts, sometimes even rolled-up sleeves, like a man who finally wanted to feel the world instead of owning it. One evening, after nearly a year, Ethan walked back into that same diner. The bell above the door jingled softly, and the familiar smell of coffee and fresh bread hit him. It was like stepping back into the moment that had changed everything. Maya was still there, taking orders with her gentle smile. When she saw him, she froze for a second, unsure if it was really him. Ethan smiled, not the proud, practiced grin from the magazines, but a real one, small, honest, human. He took a seat at the same booth. "You again," Maya said playfully. "Still chasing the market?" Ethan chuckled. "Not anymore. These days, I'm chasing meaning." She poured his coffee. Curious. "Meaning, huh? Find any yet?" He nodded slowly. "A little. And I owe most of it to someone who once told me money is like fire." Her eyes softened, realizing he remembered every word. He slid an envelope across the table. She frowned, hesitant. "What's this?" he said quietly. "A thank you and an invitation." Inside, there was a letter offering her a position as an advisor in his new foundation, and a note in his handwriting. "You taught me how to invest in people." Maya's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide behind a smile. "I'm just a waitress," she whispered. "You were," he replied gently. "Now you're the reason thousands will learn to stand again." The diner felt different that night. The rain outside had stopped, replaced by the hum of quiet hope. Two people sat across from each other, not billionaire and waitress anymore, but teacher and student, equals in humanity. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Ethan lifted his cup and said softly, "To new beginnings." Maya smiled and clinked her cup against his. "To using fire the right way," she said. As the camera fades, the scene lingers on that diner window. The same neon light, glowing gently, the world outside rushing as usual. But inside, time stands still. The narrator's voice echoes the message left behind. Sometimes wisdom doesn't wear a suit. Sometimes it wears an apron. And the richest people are those who know when to listen. Ethan would go on to change thousands of lives, but he always said his true fortune began that night in a small diner with a waitress who dared to tell him the truth. And for Maya, she never stopped serving coffee. But now, She served something greater, inspiration, because some moments don't just change a man's life. They rewrite the definition of success itself.